it shows that there is a certain amount of fear amongst the people who decide these things, that what we're showing is correct and that people cannot be allowed to see it, because then the whole Apollo program starts to disintegrate under the weight of its own contradictions.
It reminded me of Bart. So when Bart took that film to the ABC digital newsroom, the anchor told him, yo, this does show that they faked at least that part of it. But I'm sorry, but we can't show it because it will cause riots and upset throughout the country.
Yeah.
And that was the end of it. That didn't go any further than that. You see, so suppression again. And this is no different than what we're showing. I mean, we're showing LEMs that are inside of the other spacecraft. It's inside the window.
Yeah.
And yet people are going to say, oh, well, that can't be. That's just a reflection or it's something else. But no, that LEM is inside of that window frame.
Poor quality Photoshop cut and paste.
And you could see it. I mean, like Taffy said, his 5-year-old granddaughter can cut around an object cleaner than that.
Well, and then today's technology, you can snip them out of there with a lasso device, right?
Somebody cut that out of there and that went into the optical printer and they screwed up because they had it overlapping the window on the inside.
Yeah, they did. But you see, when this was done, however many years ago, they created all this stuff, they didn't think there would be some people around who were prepared to sit and look and find the joins, which is what we've done. It takes a while to do it, but after a while you start to see the whole progression of the propaganda. It started a bit slapdash, cut and paste, which was the old style of airbrushing. And it got a bit more sophisticated after a while when they realized they had to get it better, but they didn't get it good enough. When you get people like Neil deGrasse Tyson claiming that we're all wrong and that he's right, he doesn't prove it, he just asserts it. That's not the way to do it. Asserting something is not the same as demonstrating it and proving it with hard, factual, irrevertible evidence.
And he always talks about the scientific method. Well, where is his? We're showing you the scientific method. We've shown you with a film. We've shown you with all types of other photos. And now we're showing it with this LEM. How can a LEM be inside of a window of the other craft when it's supposed to be outside ready to dock? I mean, come on, guys.
No, it can't be.
His stuff is theoretical, so he doesn't have to show anything. And that's a nice way to skip along through life. It's probably one of the easiest paths to be on, and it's nice to have that kind of a talent if you're a fiction writer, or if you write poetry. It's nice to have that kind of imagination and talent if you're a painter or an artist of any kind. That's where the thought process comes in to create those things. But you need logic to be a technical person that creates technical machines. You have to understand it from start to finish.
And science. You've got to have science behind you.
And you have to have a full gamut of scientific knowledge to back that up, to create that logical path. And the people that are working on the rockets, on space travel in general, have to have all of that when they're designing it. And guess what? The design hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in the engines, hasn't changed in the fueling system, it hasn't changed in the launch pad, it hasn't changed in the way the rocket operates through the stages. They still need those multiple stages to work to get there. You're restricted by the speed of acceleration that you can actually create through there because of the G-forces, like they hit that maximum Q. They're going to throttle back the engines, everything else, because of the forces, you're still within the atmosphere at that point. All of those kind of things have to be considered when you're designing that rocket. And what we discussed earlier between the comparison between the Falcon 9 and the Apollo rockets, they're so similar in design. Where's the technology? Certainly the computers have advanced. Their guidance system have advanced. Musk's first stage is capable of landing back on its own so it can be reused. That's definitely an advancement. But the basic operation of these rockets are so identical. People designing this must realize what the limitations are, because otherwise they would exceed it.
Yeah, they almost certainly do know what the limitations are because they've done enough testing. It was quite an advance when Musk developed the launching of the Falcon 9 and getting the rocket to land back here on Earth. I mean, that was a major achievement. NASA had never done that.
The guidance system and the computer control on them, you got laser targeting, everything else that'll help guide them in, right? All of that stuff is there, and all you need to do is have the fuel and the little retros to push it into place.
No, it's very strange, the whole thing, where you take Apollo, which is 60-year-old technology, developed prior to that. You've got Apollo able to do all the things that we're told it did, land on the moon, all that stuff, and people go along with it because they have no reason not to believe it at the time. The propaganda was very powerful. It had to be. People had to be convinced of it, and they were convinced of it.
The rocket was impressive on launch.
Oh yeah, it was.
That's the part that everybody focuses on. That is a real launch with a real rocket, one of the largest machines ever built at the time.
The thing is, they could have even faked that too, because I've shown that many times in videos, how they're all of a sudden, these guys are out there in the launch watching it all, then all of a sudden, next scene, whoop, they're inside and the rocket's doing nothing yet. It's a big model. I mean, yeah, no, it was real. Of course it was real, but it just goes to show you what they could do, what they could do. Yeah. Same with all those simulators. Why? Why do you need all those simulators for? 7. Those 7 separate simulators, and I didn't even get started yet. There's lots more.
The footage out the window of those simulators that you're showing, I think some of that footage is the same footage that they're using for the orbiting.
Definitely in Apollo 10.
Claim is real.
Yeah. Oh, in Apollo 10, definitely. That's the same plaster mold that you see for Apollo 10.
Which is why you have the camera tracks next to the sections of the lunar surface, whether it's a distant view of the lunar surface or a close-up view. You still have camera tracks.
And if you don't have camera tracks, then they have those other ones where they have the mold upside down and the camera's mounted looking up.
Yeah.
So then they have those ones. And I have one shot of that on Apollo 10, and they say it's real, by the way. This is official Apollo 10 footage. And then when I run that simulator and side by side, you'll notice it's the same.
Of course it is. That's where most of the filming came from.
That's probably why they had to keep the molds today, because they have to have those same features that are on those molds. And when they do here's Apollo 11 landing site, they're using that same image that was taken from that mold and put some tracks on it and the flag and whatever else they want to put on it. And then they can only get so close to it. We talked about today's camera technology. Why can't we get a nice close-up photograph of it? No, they're still using those molds to create that image. So it can't be any better than that. Good luck to anybody trying to reproduce it, because if they did take a close-up of the lunar surface, they're going to find it's going to be quite different than what NASA imagined the surface to look like. They have given us the images of what the lunar surface is supposed to look like, or their interpretation of what the lunar surface is looking like. But when you got 4.5 billion years of cosmic dust down there, no wind, no rain, nothing to push that down, plus impacts, you're not going to see little tiny rocks like a gravel pit anywhere. It's not going to be there, especially where they landed, the Sea of Tranquility. I mean, you can see that from a telescope from Earth, or even a good set of binoculars. You can see the difference in that surface. You can see that the large meteor impact craters, the rim around it, have been completely filled in with dust. And they're saying, oh, well, that's molten lava. I've seen different articles. Oh, well, that's molten. That's just solid rock there. That's how they landed on it. Bullshit.
And don't forget there's water within those rims.
Oh, well, the water is the latest problem. Pretty soon it's just going to be a ball of water. I mean, any land, it's actually, you just have little mountain peaks up. Everything is water.
Well, maybe they're going to do that. They might have a lunar hockey team.
They could have.
But that's why they got the Canadian astronauts, isn't it? You've got to have a hockey team go to the moon.
Oh, yes, sure.
You know how the first hockey players from Quebec got to Ontario? Got a breakaway on the St. Lawrence.
Well, yeah, no,
What's
this, I mean, this
interesting
is,
is the PowerPoint presentation up there, and haven't heard a comment about it.
yeah, isn't that something, eh?
Yeah, and it's all there for people to look at.
And what gets me is that you still don't get very many comments about that LEM either, sitting inside of that window frame.
No,
As a matter of fact, that other guy, that chocolate strawberry, he doesn't even want to bring it up when you ask him.
oh, he's made some really strange comment, that boy.
Seen some of them.
He decided he didn't want to debate me because all of his comments were actually endorsing everything that we were saying.
Yeah.
And then he put a comment up saying that, oh, well, we've got a very bright future because we're going to have nuclear power. We're going to have planes that fly faster than the speed of sound and some other stuff, right? And I'm going, well, that happened in the 40s and 50s and and even supersonic aircraft were in the 70s, right? Like 50 years ago. We were doing that. I mean, atomic power was demonstrated in 1945. The nuclear power plants were built in the early 60s, right on through. I don't know where he's getting the idea that we're going to have all of these things in the future because we've had them for the last 60, 70 years.
Yep, we have.
Oh, and he made another comment about our rocket technology and stuff like that. Well, if you look up and see what Musk is actually doing with his rockets to get the power up, he's using a free flow design of the fuel, and they're considered very, very thirsty. So when you're using methane, that's why that rocket sat there for 7 seconds on there without a payload. It's using so much fuel to get that 500,000 foot-pounds on there. And if you read documents, he said you can't even get to space with these because they just run out of fuel. They're so thirsty, they simply can't do that. It's just amazing. And then there's comments on the Merlin engines. Like you could read different articles on the amount of thrust that they're producing. And it's anywhere from 220,000 to 380,000.
No, he didn't get that memo.
No, but the documents are out there and they're designed to confuse people because every time you read a document on there, but then Musk is saying if you're using methane, I can get 500,000 out of them.
Well, good for him.
Which is fine, except they're so thirsty you can't get to space with them if you're using methane.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's right, and the articles are there. It doesn't matter what we put up and how we state it. People will find another document that contradicts that, and that's done deliberately.
Yeah, because they can't afford to have people showing that there are faults, there are problems. I mean, they've been launching rockets since the 1940s. First rocket up was the V2, the German rocket. It was quite a small one relative to what's being used today. But 1940, I mean, we're talking, 80 years ago?
And the engine design is the same.
Exactly.
It has not changed.
Which is why when America found all those V2 rockets lying around, but they hadn't been launched, they shipped them back to White Sands Missile Base and tried to work out how to use them. And they're still trying to do it. There's an interesting interview a couple of days ago. I think it was space.com was doing it. It was a filmed interview saying, well, what's the problem with rockets today? You know, Elon Musk's rockets keep blowing up. Well, the first ones did. And the excuse was that every time you develop a rocket, you've got to test it. And the tests tend to go wrong, which is why some of the early rockets were spectacular fireballs. They just didn't work. And eventually they get it right. Yeah, that's true. That's development. But what we're looking at today is very similar rockets to what was used 80 years ago with the V2 rocket. They're a bit bigger. They go a bit further. But are they any better? Are they the latest development? I mean, we've got the X-37B space plane, that strange little device that nobody knows where it goes, nobody knows what it does, but it's up there for years at a time. Could have gone to Mars in that time and back. Maybe it did. I don't know. Nobody knows. But is that using the same sort of propulsion? No, it's not. It's using ion drive. It's so small, it may not go very fast, but it's using new technology, which is not being discussed. Why is that, I wonder? Why don't people want to talk about it? And I suspect that there are certainly people at NASA now who never knew the Apollo space program because they weren't old enough. Most of the people at NASA now are quite young. They certainly don't know what was being used in the Apollo program. So how do they know what's going to work? They've got to start again. They've got to start right at the beginning because the Apollo record appears to be flawed, appears to be not what it's claimed to be. Because if it was so successful, they could launch all those whacking great Saturn V rockets, get them to the moon, land humans on the moon, and then get them back to Earth again safely. It's a great achievement if that's what happened. But we now know that's not what happened. The whole thing was a fabrication. It was a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise designed to show the superiority of American technology. In that it succeeded brilliantly. Everybody thinks American technology is the best around, except it's not, because they can't get back to the moon. They've been trying for weeks, months, years to get back to the moon. They haven't got there yet. Not with humans, they haven't.
Well, the problem is you can start with the heat shields on the re-entry. You can start with the spacesuits. Why do you need to redesign them if the other ones work so well?
Exactly. And why use a film production company to do it?
And why can't they reproduce an F1 engine?
Because they didn't keep the plans. And all the engineers didn't write their notes down properly. So nobody knows what changes were made on the F1 engines.
Except when Bezos, so-called, recovered them from the Atlantic,
Yep.
They rebuilt them and actually test fired them.
Of course they could do that if they wanted to, but they don't want to.
Yeah, so if they can do that, why don't they actually use them?
I don't know.
That's interesting. And why try and develop a spacesuit if those zippers work so well in the first ones?
Dear, oh dear. Exactly.
Right. Why go to a movie studio costume designer and pay them huge amounts of money? It's $3.5 billion, and they still can't develop a suit.
And they haven't tested it yet, have they? They haven't put it in a vacuum chamber and tested it.
And then, of course, we got people here that comment that seem to know so much about it. They should be working with Elon Musk because they know how to do it better than anybody, because we have looked at what they're commenting on and claiming all this stuff, and they claim they know so much about it and that it works so well. Why aren't they working with Musk? Why aren't they working with SpaceX? Why aren't they working for Bezos, right? Because they have all the answers. I've been looking through the comments. These people have all of the answers.
But they're not prepared to come onto this channel and discuss it with us, are they?
No, not at all. And they always stay anonymous.
Yes. I mean, they have weird names. What's that latest guy?
Surprise to chocolate strawberry.
I mean, come on. He's playing the fool there. So come on, Mr. Chocolate Strawberry Biscuit or whatever. Get on this channel. There's an open invitation for you to come on here and discuss it with us.
He's turned us down.
Well, of course he has. They all turn us down, don't they?
Chocolate strawberry surprise. He says, why don't you guys go over to Neil deGrasse Tyson's channel, Star Talk, and ask him to come on? So guess what I did? I went over there and I left a message for him. And guess what? I never had any email response, and I never will. First, I tried it with Jerry Stone, offered him £1,000, didn't receive anything. That was last year. Then I tried it with Simon Dan. I offered him £400, didn't hear anything. Then I went and asked Neil deGrasse Tyson. Oh, of course, I left that on a different channel, but still didn't receive any reply from Neil. Then I asked this other lady that had 3.6 million subscribers on her channel, and I left a message there. No, still no reply to this day. I have them all. I have all the screenshots, which I have put in other videos, those screenshots. So if those guys want to go back and look at the older videos that we did, they're going to find all those screenshots in there. Those people have not replied to this day, and it's been a year now. How much longer do they need? David Percy's been waiting for Brian Cox to reply for 20 years.
Yeah, he has. An open letter to Brian Cox on owlist.com. That's not the actor we're talking about. It's the astrophysicist or the chap who works at CERN, or I don't know.
He's a university professor.
That's right. He's a clever chap. You'd think he'd have all the answers, wouldn't you? And he'd be willing to show us up for being complete idiots, but no, doesn't want to, because he would be shown up for being not very well informed about Apollo.
And you think he would be, because he has, with his wife, they have a program, Children of Apollo. He named his eldest son Eagle after the lander. I mean, he's all over it when it comes to that, right? He seems to claim to know more about it. He calls us idiots. He calls us everything under the sun. But at no time has he ever made any statements on the technical side of this achievement that he claims. He can't prove that the equipment actually worked. He can't even prove that there were people on the Saturn V rocket, because first of all, you have to get over the incredible volume of a Saturn V rocket, because it's loud enough to kill you. And at no time, when you're looking at any documents, do they have any sound protection on that. And of course, when you listen to the audio recording of them when they're in flight, it's at 70 decibels. And you really got to bring it down to get down to 70 decibels. I mean, when you listen to it, it's like they're reading a script. Their heart rate should be up there with an F1 race car driver.
Yeah, but you never hear the engines running. Even if they're inside the suits and they have that microphone keyed, they're still in an oxygen environment. Therefore, you should hear those engines just rumbling through those microphones when they key the mic, because you don't hear anything. It's just dead silent.
Yeah, of course you should hear it. You should hear some form of sound. Oh, somebody will come along and say, oh, sound doesn't travel in a vacuum.
No, wait a minute, but this is when they were taking off.
I know. And also, when they're inside the lander, whether it's the Eagle or any of the landers, they were all inside an atmosphere. Sound travels in an atmosphere.
And you could hear the tape player when they're playing the music when they're taking off.
There you
go
go.
Off into the wild blue yonder.
Yep.
You could hear that clear enough.
Yes, all part of the PR stunts that they were pulling.
Well, it sounds like it was being a movie that they were making.
It was a movie they were making. It was all fully scripted.
Full of cue cards, everything.
Yeah, cue cards. And there were no deaths on screen, were there? Because you couldn't have that. Everything worked perfectly.
I mean, if you look at Gene Cernan on his way back, I mean, it looked like he just came out of the beauty shop. His hair is absolutely groomed and perfectly shaved.
Yeah, he was probably looking for an Oscar for hair and makeup.
Yeah, they were all like that.
Quite extraordinary. In fact, several Soviet space engineers have commented on that. How come when the Apollo astronauts got back after their trip to the moon, they looked like they'd just come out of an exercise gym, whereas our astronauts could hardly stand up. They had to be carried from the spacecraft, and that's only in low Earth orbit.
And that could be a pretty good movie stunt, too.
Yeah.
I mean, because they seem to recover really fast.
Oh, they did. Amazing. And they had no acclimatization before they went on their lunar walking.
Even the fact that they didn't have any conditioning prior to launch, because they're going from a full atmosphere down to 5 psi within a few minutes. And when you look at climbing any kind of altitude, like you're going to 35,000 feet, which is approximately 5 psi. If you're going to climb a mountain at that height, there are stages. You go up 10,000 feet and you stop for 4 or 5 days, and then up another 10,000 feet and stop for another, like a week maybe, to condition your body with it. And then when you're climbing to the peak on those mountains, you have oxygen with you to do that. And people die doing those things.
Yes, above 26,000 feet, which is on Everest and a few other mountains, it's called the death zone, because people die, hence death zone. If you're climbing Mount Everest, which is 29,000 feet, about 5 miles, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, you have to acclimatize. You spend time, as you say, at about 10,000 feet. Then you get up to base camp at 19,000 feet, and you spend several days there acclimatizing to the lowered air pressure. Then you climb Mount Everest to 29,000 feet, and unless you've got the right equipment, you're going to die. There are 300 bodies at the top of Everest because they can't be brought down. It's too dangerous. So if you die on Mount Everest, you're going to stay on Mount Everest. Right, a few bodies have been brought down, But it's such a dangerous place to go that you can literally walk past people who are coming down the mountain, who are literally dying, and you cannot stop to help them because otherwise you will die as well. This is a very dangerous place.
The energy loss that your body's having is just something else. And you realize they can't even go up there with a helicopter to pick them up. Even a jet engine helicopter is, 26,000 feet? That's it.
Well, it's just at the start of the death zone.
Yeah. And even if they got up that high, they wouldn't be able to lift anything. They're at their limit.
Now, the idea that you can then go into an Apollo command module and be pressurized at 5 pounds per square inch, which is the same pressure as the top of Mount Everest, and appear to have no reaction to it at all, is physically ridiculous.
And they're doing it within minutes.
Yeah.
They're going from sea level to that in minutes. And that's where I have a problem with that, because there's no way for the body to adjust. They're going to have altitude sickness. They're going to be throwing up all over the place because of the internal pressure, right? Your vision's going to go off. You're going to have difficulty with that. If you don't have an incredible headache from the amount of pressure that you're getting, because it's almost like being hydrocephalic instantly with that type of pressure.
That's why the Soviet craft had atmospheric pressure inside, because they knew the problems that would exist if they didn't. The Soviet cosmonauts started life in a capsule, the same pressure as we have here on Earth. The Apollo astronauts didn't do that. They magically went from sea level pressure, 14.7 pounds per square inch, to 5 pounds per square inch, with no apparent effect and no apparent training. It's ridiculous.
And there's no comments about it in any of the transcripts.
No, you're right. And there's no comments on these. Each time we mention this, the difference in pressure, nobody comes forward and said, well, this is the answer. This is how they did it. Nobody does that because NASA didn't do it. They knew they didn't have to do it because they weren't sending any astronauts anywhere near that level of space. So they just ignored it. Because they ignored it and they didn't have to deal with it, we now see the fabrication of Apollo for real. There's so many things which are now coming to light or have come to light. We've commented on them quite a lot of the time. So you've got this ridiculous dichotomy between what we know to be scientifically accurate, levels of pressure, human ability to withstand that pressure, or what they have to do to ensure they can withstand it, and the reality of what happened on Apollo. The two don't match. Apollo was fake. And if anybody from NASA is hearing this and wondering what we're talking about, check it out, guys. It's not rocket science. It's just standard physics. And if you're going to send astronauts up on your Artemis program without knowing this, you're going to have dead astronauts on your hands. And your funding will be pulled by Congress because you're killing people. Don't kill people. Be humble enough and be decent enough to look into the science of it, not the propaganda of it.
Even people that are going up to Lake Titicaca, when they're going up even 12,500 feet, a good percentage of people are suffering from altitude sickness, even there. Even if they go up for 3 or 4 hours, it comes on with them. And if they don't get down, they will virtually die.
That's the only solution to altitude sickness, is to come down altitude, come down.
And that's only 12,500 feet.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happens on Mount Kilimanjaro, because it's quite an easy mountain to climb in Kenya. It's on the equator. And there's ice on top, but that's another story. A lot of people climb Mount Kilimanjaro quite often for charity. And if they can't withstand the reduced pressure at the altitude of Mount Kilimanjaro, which I believe is about 17,000, 18,000 feet, they have to come off the mountain to recover from altitude sickness. Same with Everest, same with any mountain. Annapurna, which is the most deadly mountain, that's where more people have died compared to the number of people who've climbed it.
If you don't recognize it right away, you're going to become physically disabled and not be able to descend.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. So how come all these astronauts could go into this low pressure environment and not appear to have any adverse effects with no acclimatization?
And you won't find any documentation to show that they had any kind of testing for that.
No, they didn't, because NASA knew they didn't have to go there. Go there, go there, go there, go there, go there.